This has gone on for 28 years. For 28 years, either it appears that Boulder Police have been trying to convict you or Patsy. Do you think they want to solve this?
I don't know. That's a good question. They've had very poor leadership up until about 25 years ago, and they brought in a new police chief from outside. And incidentally, Beckner, the chief that was there for 20-some years, came out of the traffic division. He'd never investigated a homicide. Boulder did not even have a homicide department. And
none of the investigators on the case, none of them had any homicide experience.
Yeah, and I've never criticized them for that, ever. But I've criticized them for refusing help from people that could have helped, that had experience. And that happened really from the beginning and continued for 25 years. They brought in a new police chief from outside the department, which I thought was a big step forward, hopefully to change the culture. We had met with her, had a good meeting, thought we were making some progress. Basically what we've been asking them to do, or through this petition that was signed, asked the governor to intervene to do, is transfer the custody of the evidence, crime scene evidence, to the FBI, and then use the familial database, genealogy database, which has been wildly successful in solving some old cold cases. Use that technique to see what we come up with. If we do that, then we've done the best that can be done, and if we come up empty-handed, at least we tried. And that's all we're asking. And that just isn't happening as far as we know. I talked to the interim police chief, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, and said, it's kind of the common greeting when you see a friend is, hey, what's happening? Well, I want to know what's happening. And he said, well, I can't, there's some things happening. I can't tell you what's happening. Okay. And we just don't think DNA technology is there yet to continue trying to get more DNA information. And that's not an acceptable answer. I think technology is there. And so we're really advocating that the crime scene evidence be put in the custody of the FBI, and then they can do with it whatever they want. We've got a real screwy system in this country, in that we have 18,000 police jurisdictions. Each one's a little island of authority. And if a bicycle theft happens on that island, it's the police chief's responsibility. If a child murder happens on that island, it's the chief of police responsibility. If he doesn't ask for help, help cannot come in. Help can offer to come in. In our case, it was refused. And that's really a screwy system. And you're hoping to make some changes there, advocate for some changes there where, significant resources could come to bear on this kind of crime, which would have helped us a lot, and I'm sure would help other families. That, we're fortunate in a way in that the loss of our child has become very public and very known, and I'm grateful for that, because I don't want it to go away, because it's unsolved. And I don't want the police to just put it in a file cabinet and hope someday somebody will walk in the front door and confess. So the public pressure is very important, and that's really why I've engaged with the media over the years, to keep that pressure on the police. But all they have to do is transfer custody of the evidence to the FBI at this point. We'd be happy with that step, and that to date has not. They've not been willing to do that, so very frustrating.
Let's update you on, since a lot of you signed that petition, which we're so grateful for. Since 2016, 8 years ago, that's when the DNA focusing on genealogy became widespread and worldwide. That was the introduction of it. Because you all have a background and have studied crime, you're aware, probably not each specific example, none of us are, but how fast the technology has changed. You're aware of the cold cases that have been solved. because of the advances in genealogy DNA. Yet since 2016, Boulder Police have a minuscule amount of DNA, and they have refused to turn it over to a competent lab. And again, they're saying it because technologically it's not there. Well, what do the best labs say? The best labs say, you got that little bit of DNA, do it. We don't necessarily need to destroy it, but do it, let's move forward. I've always felt that the only way you can solve JonBenét's case is through genealogy DNA. But that hasn't happened. The FBI has joined in with Boulder Police, but they have no authority. Thank gosh they're there, but they have no authority. In Colorado, state law dictates that Boulder Police can ask someone to help, but they don't have to turn over the DNA, they don't have to turn over case files, they don't have to turn over crime scene evidence. As far as we've been able to determine, because Boulder Police won't tell us, the case files have been turned over to the FBI. But how good are the case files? How good was the police force? Not very good, the investigators, from what we've been able to determine. So 2 years ago, the creator of CrimeCon, Kevin Balfe, in his truly infinite wisdom, said, well, maybe one of the ways we can help is we can start this petition. And he started the petition that asked Governor Jared Polis of Colorado to take the DNA aspect, only the DNA aspect of the case, away from Boulder Police and get it to a competent lab. And there are really competent labs on the national level. Othram is a good example of one. So the petition was signed. 34,600 plus of you have signed that petition, and again, thank you. And that was sent to the governor, who in turn blocked John's access to his office online, which is just like, what? I mean, why? Then John sent him a letter, and we publicized the letter, so therefore the governor responded and said, I'm turning it over to my state people, and he's got some really good state people. And he said, and I'm asking for the cold case review people from the state of Colorado to look at the case. Well, these are competent people. These are experienced homicide detectives, but it was all private. So we have no idea how competent Boulder's representation of the case was to these homicide investigators. What they put in, what they left out, what was correct, what was not, what was incorrect. You look at what the former Boulder police chief said about the 45 minutes, completely wrong on the cause of death. So that's how many people signed it. John, I've talked about the governor really didn't respond. What kind of dealings did you have with him? Did you talk to him personally?
No. I wrote a letter, submitted the 34,000 signature petition, which asked for the two things I mentioned: transfer of the DNA authority, testing authority, and using the familial genealogy approach. He wrote me a nice letter back eventually and referred us to the Department of Public Safety. He did ask for a cold case. I thought, well, that maybe is good, probably is a step forward. And I looked at the people that are on the cold case committee, and they're very credible, very experienced homicide detectives from other jurisdictions. So I was very encouraging. I offered to meet with them if they wanted, but I never heard directly what their recommendations were. What the police told us was there were 25 or so recommendations that they made that we should do. We're in the process of prioritizing them, and I did hear through the grapevine that the cold case committee recommended more testing, which was encouraging. So that was a step forward for sure. And but it gets back to, we just want more outside resources brought in.
We've been doing this for 28 years. Why It seems like a simple request. Take the DNA aspect away from Boulder Police, who are not doing anything with it. They refuse to turn it over to a competent lab because they say the technology's not there. And yet I know a lot of you know, probably in reading about these labs that specialize in DNA genealogy, that the labs are saying, turn it over. We can do so much with this. What's your reaction to, I've never been able to figure it out. I don't know if you have. Why won't he help? Why is anything that has the word Ramsey in it automatically precluded?
Yeah, it's difficult to understand that. I met with the new police chief at the time she was new, a couple of years ago. I said, look, I've been very critical of the police, not because of inexperience, but because you've refused help from the outside. And I said, in a way, that's not fair to you, new police chief, because you didn't create this mess, but you certainly could solve it. And so I felt bad continuing to criticize. Being a cop is a hard job. I couldn't do it. I would not have the skill set or the mentality to do it. So I appreciate that. But I've not seen any evidence that things are moving forward, so I've got to keep beating on them. I looked at this Moscow, Idaho case when it happened, this 3 students that were murdered tragically. The first thing I looked at was, how big is Moscow, Idaho? 30,000 people. I thought, oh boy, this could be a problem, because they probably don't have a homicide department. They probably don't have anybody that's experienced investigating homicide. Chief of police got up in front of a TV audience and said, this is our case, we're going to manage it. I thought, oh, that's not good, based on our experience. He brought in everybody he could get his hands on. He had 40 FBI agents on site. He had the state police. That man knew how to manage a police department and recognize that they're not skilled at everything. And boy, I've complimented him verbally a lot. And it ought to be a case study. Here's how you don't do it. Here's how you do it. They're so dramatically different, and the outcomes are dramatically different. So that's really all we've been asking for 25 years. If you want to investigate us more, great, do it. In fact, I told our attorneys early on, I said, let them charge us. Let's just go to court and duke this out. And they said, you shouldn't have to go through that. We will destroy them in court, no question, but you shouldn't have to go through that. But it's just been frustrating. And until we see some real progress, but they're simple steps that could be done. And all we're asking is as much that can be done in today's technology world and skill level world, as much can be done as possible, and we do it, and we come up empty-handed, well, at least we tried. And that's all we're asking.
Exactly. In the Idaho student killing case, the DNA that was found on the knife sheath was turned over to state police and the FBI, who then turned it over to a national DNA genealogy lab. And that's how the suspect was traced so fast. And that's exactly what John and others are asking for here. John, as part of trying to move this forward, you talked to some people involved in the federal Homicide Victims Family Rights Act. Got that? Can you repeat it back?
Yeah, this is really
important. It's called the Homicide Victims Family Rights Act. And he just talked to them the other day. He and I talked to them 2 weeks ago. Explain that, John.
Well, the key words in that title are Family Rights Act. Family's rights as of the victim of a homicide. Today, and that's been the fundamental problem in our case, we don't have any ability to move things differently or forward if there's no action on the police department, the local police department. And the other thing that And so I've gotten really interested in trying to do whatever I can to make that a state level law. Right now it's a federal law. It was signed into law in 2022. There's been 5 states that have adopted that into their law, that the families of a homicide victim have certain rights. If the police aren't doing their job, if it's become a cold case, they can, under the law now, at the federal level, require a new team come in or a cold case review. There's several things you can affect to happen if your case isn't moving forward. All a family can do right now is sit by the phone and hope the police call and tell them that they've done something or they've solved the case. If that doesn't happen, then they have no rights. Right now, it's a federal law, which, you know, surprisingly, the murder is a state law, and I didn't know that. Murder of a child is a state law. And you rob a bank, the FBI comes in. You murder a child, it's up to, if you remember Barney Fife in Mayberry, if it happened in Mayberry, it's up to Barney. And if Barney doesn't ask for help, help cannot come in. And that's a really bad system. Families need some rights to address that when that happens. And you know, the other thing, I'm grateful that our case has public attention as much as it does, because that keeps pressure on the system to do the right thing, and maybe we can affect some changes that help other families. I know there's lots of other families that have lost a child in this kind of circumstance, and it's not visible. We've forgotten that child, and that's sad. And if we can do something that makes the system better, that'll help other families too. It'll certainly help us. It would have helped us immensely had that kind of law been in place 25 years ago. It's a no-brainer, but it needs attention by your state legislators. But it's the, I always have a hard time, it's kind of a weird name, Homicide Victims Family Rights Act. And it's a federal law, but it is not applicable at the state level yet. There's about 5 states that have adopted it so far. And the objective is to get all 50, how many states we have here? Biden said 47, but I think there's more. There's more than that. Get it enacted in all the states. So but that's something you all could really help with if you have contacts in your state legislature. Say, hey, you guys need to look at this Family Rights Act that was passed at the federal level. It needs to be in our state.
And we will keep you updated through Kevin and Kelly and the CrimeCon team in terms of when the states are considering it, so that you might be able to make some calls to some of your legislators. As part of this, by Boulder Police, we don't have enough DNA, minuscule amount, we can't turn it over. So I tried to find out, is there a list about the crime scene evidence in the Ramsey case that has been tested? And I found out there was no list. So I have an investigative reporter background, so it was like, what can I find out? So I looked at all the DNA tests that I could get a hold of. They're still private, but I was able to get a lot of them. And I was able to get information about them, what has and has not been tested. And I want you to look at this list. It's a long list. And as far as I know, Boulder Police still has not sent this list out to see if any of these crime scene evidence items has DNA that could solve their supposed DNA problem. So, again, these are crime scene evidence items ever untested for DNA. They were not tested for DNA. The garrote pole handle. The ransom note, and that's a 2.5-page ransom note. JonBenét's name is never mentioned in that ransom note. There are no swear words in the ransom note. It's almost a taunting ransom note. No DNA taken from it. The suitcase under the window well. The suitcase that some speculated was a way out. The suitcase that contained items of JonBenét's, her nightie and a Dr. Seuss book. That Dr. Seuss book was not tested. An unknown flashlight and its batteries found in the kitchen. They didn't know who it belonged to. That was never tested for DNA. A rope found in John Andrews, John's son, in his room, that he didn't know what it was. And I put it in black and white because we're not sure of the derivation. We're just using something that looks like it. The black duct tape, never tested for DNA. What? And then again, a child's Dr. Seuss book that was found in the suitcase underneath the window well. All right, those were never tested for DNA, but these items haven't been tested since 1997, 1998, and 1999. They were not tested for touch DNA in 2008. You all know, every one of you knows, how many changes there have been in DNA technology since those dates. JonBenét's long sleeve shirt has not been tested for 28 years for DNA. The ligature on the neck hasn't been tested for DNA for 28 years. The ligature on her wrists, what a little sweet angel girl, isn't she? The broken paintbrush that was used to fashion the garrote. Her underwear, not tested for DNA. The interior of the body bag. I'll say it again, I'm sorry, John. Her fingernail fragrance, not tested for 28 years, and that's where they got some of the original DNA, but 28 years ago compared to now, how much more might there be? And then the vaginal, rectal, and thigh swabs haven't been tested for 28 years. These are crime scene items tested for touch DNA in 2008, but not retested for 16 years. And again, I know that you're getting an idea of, wow, why weren't they tested? And then why don't you test them now? Because the list that I then gave to John that he utilized in his letter to the governor sent to Boulder Police. As far as we know, they have sent none of these crime scene evidence items out for testing to see if there's DNA on them. And to me, it's astounding and appalling. Come on, let's get this solved. What is the hang-up? Her long john pants, which were found to have DNA in the waistband for touch DNA, and her nightgown. So there's a list of all the crime scene evidence items that have not been tested for DNA that should be tested for DNA. You might find more DNA, but you still have that minuscule amount that can be tested today, and a conclusion reached.